Hello, I'm Kelly Wright of Fox 43 News.
And I'm Vandora Williams of WHRO TV 15. Welcome to Benin.
You might wonder why is WHRO and Fox 43 News in Africa together. Well, it's because we're doing a joint effort to focus on a reconciliation and development conference being spearheaded right here in the country of Benin.
Absolutely. It's an historic event that the president of Benin has called to reconcile his past, his country's past, with Europe and America. And we have delegations from all of these nations coming here to talk about reconciliation and how the past has affected us even up to this day.
And I'll tell you, Vandor, for those who have attended this event, including ourselves, it has truly been an emotional event. We are going to show you some of that emotion, and we're going to come back to the gate of no return to show you the significance it's had in terms of our history, in terms of the slave trade. We'll tell you how the slave trade has affected the global economy that we know today.
Absolutely. We'll show you the places where the slaves passed through on their way to enslavement in the Americas.
Now, one thing we'd like to do is start off by showing you Benin.
This is Benin, West Africa, a small country tucked between Togo and Nigeria. Though small and unknown, it played a major role in world history. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, Benin was known as the slave capital of Africa. The infamous kings of Abame sold millions of Africans to Europeans. Now this small country is making history again. Led by President Matthew Karakou, the nation apologized to the descendants of those Africans for their role in the slave trade. Africa is alive with rhythm. They use music, singing, and dancing to celebrate great events and to offer a festive welcome for special guests and dignitaries. Benin President Matthew Karakou and the President of Ghana, Gerald Rawlings, arrived amid much fanfare, complete with an inspection of honored soldiers. The kings of Benin arrived with quiet dignity. They all gathered in Cotonou, Benin to do a noble thing, apologize for slavery. More than 300 people traveled to West Africa to hear the apology. An apology President Karakou hopes will change the course of his country's future.
4 centuries ago, our beloved Africa was subjected to the most traumatic and dehumanizing treatment in the history of mankind, the slave trade. The trading humans took away the most able-bodied men and women and even children from Africa, plundered our God-given resources, and divided our peoples and nations in a manner that generated hatred, mistrust, and suspicion amongst brothers and sisters, people of various ethnic.
For years, many believed that Europeans raped, pillaged, and even stole Africans from their native land and subjected them to a life in chains. But the facts expressed during this reconciliation conference in Benin reveals the evidence that African kings entered an unthinkable alliance with Europeans to sell their own into captivity. In 1444, Portuguese merchants sailed to what was then Dahomey. There they brokered a fiendish deal: trade valueless goods, wood, gunpowder, silk, and tobacco for human souls.
We will tell you that through your visit to WIDA, we will give you very hard explanations. My message to African American is, first of all, to forgive us, because we recognize our part of responsibility in that business. Without our help, I don't think it would be so easy for Europeans. So please forgive us and let's come back home.
Africans like Martin de Souza are not alone in their regret for being involved in the slave trade. Many European business leaders, representatives of government, and members of the United States Congress also came to apologize for the role their ancestors played in perpetuating slavery.
If you offend your spouse or your friend, if you get in a fight with your best friend or your wife, if you don't say I'm sorry, it's never going to be resolved.
U.S. Congressman Tony Hall is no stranger to West Africa, and he's no stranger to the growing desire for an official apology to be made for slavery in the United States. In 1997, on the heels of President Clinton's dialogue on race, Congressman Hall introduced a House resolution for Congress to apologize.
That the Congress apologizes to African Americans whose ancestors suffered as slaves under the Constitution and the laws of the United States until 1865.
The resolution hasn't passed yet, and it hasn't been taken up for debate. So Hall traveled to the small Republic of Benin, to the root of slavery, to join others in offering an apology.
I know that I would not want my children sold as slaves. I know that it would tear me apart if my wife was taken from me. I know that I would be angry if I was beaten or whipped or simply because of the color of my skin.
Senator James Inhofe offered an apology to the African American delegation.
But as far as the ancestors of white America and white Europe, I ask on their behalf to the ancestors of black America, being grieved, the total and divine forgiveness which I ask of today, once and for all.
Let me, once again before you, say on behalf of our people how sorry we are for the misdeeds of the past.
How do I, as a white European, begin to speak on behalf of the tens of millions who have perpetrated the slave trade? And we ask your forgiveness for the abominations we, through our forebears, have inflicted upon you, our beloved brothers and sisters.
Michael Fenton Jones, a member of the International Christian Chamber of Commerce, says the wealth he enjoys today is a direct result of his ancestors becoming rich on the backs of African slaves in England.
I felt very much as a businessman coming out of UK. You know, we carry a very heavy responsibility for perpetuating the slave trade. It's no good brushing it aside and saying, well, it was going on in Africa anyway, and all we were doing is picking up what the Africans were already doing to their own kind. But the fact is that, I mean, the prosperity of the UK through the Industrial Revolution and the whole of the turmoil in Europe, we avoided largely in the UK through our involvement in the slave trade and through the profits that we were generating. So we became rich at the expense of the poor, and it hurts the heart of God.
David Alton, a member of Great Britain's Parliament and representative of Liverpool's City Council, presented President Carriacou with a sculpture called Reconciliation. It depicts two people reconciling through an embrace. Alton also presented a declaration of apology on behalf of the citizens of Liverpool.
But as their last formal act of this millennium, they wish to place on record their shame and their remorse for what their forebears did in Liverpool in perpetrating the slave trade. Many of the slave ships came from Liverpool as part of the notorious Triangle of Infamy, and they sailed from Liverpool to West Africa and then on to America, to the Caribbean, and then back to Liverpool. And vast sums of money passed hands.
The kings of Benin offered their own apology to the African Americans. They met with them after the ceremony and personally asked for forgiveness. Many African Americans found that their faith was a bridge to reconciliation.
We are very happy God, what you did for us today, we never forget.
Delighted to meet you. Delighted to meet you. Yes, I wish you welcome back home.
Thank you.
And I want you to be home without any condition. Any place in Africa is your home.
Alistair Geddes of Scotland is now a businessman in Virginia Beach and the pastor of an interracial church in Norfolk called Riverside. But more than 30 years ago, Geddes led a different life as a security officer in Rhodesia.
In fact, I was a part of propping up what was then a racist regime. It really wasn't totally apartheid, but it was very close to it. Something happened dramatically in my life in 1971 that really turned me around, in that I've been working on racial reconciliation ever since that time.
Geddes says apologizing for slavery is the noble thing to do. He adds the faith community must lead the charge towards true racial reconciliation.
I think faith helps you to understand where guilt comes from. A lot of people in America today don't see guilt with what it is. They put it off in something else. People have put aside, they've shoved it aside, this whole thing of, well, what you did was wrong, make an apology. You should be guilty, feel guilty about it. Also on the African American side, I think they've put off their problems on, well, the white man did it to me, therefore I've got a right to be bitter. But you know what? Bitterness kills. Bitterness heats up at the soul. Bitterness causes broken down relationships, and it is a time for healing.
The second day of the conference was planned for just that, healing. For some, that process proved to be overwhelming. Vandora Williams follows the footsteps of the Africans forced to walk down the road to bondage.
It's amazing that for 400 years, this road was used as a trade in human beings, a trade of somewhat called the worst kind in the world's history. But now it's being used as a trade in forgiveness from one nation to another, from one people to another. After hearing apologies offered by representatives from the slave trading nations, African Americans began the slow process of reconciliation. First, they had to travel the road their ancestors took. Their journey began in Ouida. This is a Portuguese fort where millions of Africans were sold. It was built in the 17th century and still stands as a reminder of the painful past Benin has inherited. It's now a starting point of a journey into history. Hundreds of Americans, including local Hampton Roads residents, started this journey into the past. They were greeted with ritual song and dance. Inside, the story is told how human trade began in Africa. The next stop was the auction place. In this exact spot, thousands of people were auctioned off. After being sold, the Africans had to walk. From the auction place, they walked a straight and narrow path, not knowing what lay ahead. They were taken to the place of Zamai, where they were kept in darkness and branded. They were being prepared for the holds of the slave ships.
We have different kinds of heads. The small heads represent people from the north. They were in a little number deported. And we have two big heads. The first one, which shows the presence of the Yorubas. The Yorubas also were greatly deported. The Yorubas are from Nigeria.
Some died along the way, and this is where they were buried. This memorial rests on the same spot where mass graves were dug. Many times the Africans were buried alive. For some, that awful truth was too much.
God bless you. God bless you. Don't worry.
The gate of no return was the last stop for the Americans. For the Africans, it was the beginning of a long and terrifying journey. Now, Americans and Africans can only collect the sand where their ancestors once walked, collecting grains of the past to remind them of their future.
I think that
we have dealt with our inner pain, it is just almost like icing on the cake. It's like lifting, it's like a burden or a veil or something, because we're not waiting for the apology, but the fact that someone out of their own integrity is willing to offer it is just so refreshing. It's like cold, cool, refreshing water.
I'm overwhelmed, first of all, that my ancestors endured so much. I'm a product of the 60s. My grandfather was a sharecropper, and I thought I endured hardship. But it's minor, considering what I found here in Benin.
It's impossible. I just can't begin to fathom what these people went through. You see, I was just telling somebody that you had to dehumanize the person to a point where this individual is no more a human being, it's just a thing for you to be able to do what happened here. As an African in the United States, I can more, in a better way, empathize with what the African American is going through, the very agony that has been passed on from generation to generation.
Brian Johnson lives in Virginia Beach. He's been involved in African countries for more than 20 years. He's among a growing number of African Americans who believe the African apology for slavery lifts a burden for whites and opens the eyes of blacks.
The tragedy of the slave trade still lingers on in the minds of many people here in Africa, as it does in America. There are tribes who were sold into slavery who still hold animosity to the other tribe, against the other tribes who sold them.
One tribe running from a life of slavery gave birth to a unique city on the outskirts of Cotonou. Their ingenuity and creativity have earned them the name Venice of Africa. We passed by a group of young boys playing in the water. It's about 4:30 in the afternoon on a hot winter day. Many people are making their way back to their waterfront homes. Thatched roofs and wooden buildings fill the horizon. This is another part of Benin, a city built on the water, literally. 25,000 people live here in Ganvi. In English, that's translated as peace. They make their living off of the water by fishing. Ganvi is a result of the African slave trade. In 1777, people from the village of Aja were at war with the king of Abomey, and they were losing. If captured, they knew they would be sold as slaves to the Europeans. They looked for a place where they could live without fear of the king's army finding them. Ganvi was that place. Life is very simple for the people here. 98% are fishermen, 2% are merchants. The netting and tall grass in various parts of the lake are strategically placed to capture fish. The only mode of transportation here is by boat. Neighbors must visit each other by sailing from house to house. At dusk, women and children collect drinking water from central points in the city. Shopping is done at the floating marketplace. Though their life is simple, it is hard. Education and health care are sorely lacking in the city. Many young people who can leave to be educated on the mainland. Entrepreneurship in Ganvi is alive and well. There are 3 hotels within the city. Satellite dishes, battery-operated TVs, and solar panels keep them up to date. The proprietor of the Ganvi Hotel has a hope for African Americans.
S'ils peuvent rester avec nous,
He said if you can stay with them, it will be very good.
Apporter ce qu'ils ont fait là-bas, les entreprises, toutes sortes de choses là, et faire de manière que Ganvier soit le petit Amérique là, ce serait très bon.
He said that you take part of the building of America, okay? And that if you can come and settle down here, all right, and teach them what you've done there in the United States of America, if you can bring all here, your enterprises, everything here, so that to save life of Gambian people, it will be wonderful.
Until the entrepreneurs from America join with the people of Ganvi, they have to create their own opportunities. For some, the daily routine of casting nets will have to be sufficient.
Nous ne sommes pas des esclaves en réalité.
And my message to the African Americans is they should cease to consider themselves as slaves and see that God has got them in this country to serve. And there's nothing greater than serving.
Beyond reconciliation, President Karakou hopes many African Americans will return to Benin to spur more economic development. Although a poor country, Benin is ready for expansion. Tourists travel here from Europe to vacation at the city's resort area, which resembles a Caribbean island. Bandora Williams gives us a tour of Cotonou, the largest city in Benin.
Many of the women in Cotonou wear their merchandise or do their shopping and put it on the top of their head like this. They have great balance, and as you can see, I'm still working on it. In downtown Cotonou on any given day, you'll find the streets filled with cars, mopeds, and people selling everything from food to clothing to gasoline. You'll find quaint street cafes where you can cool your parched tongue and satisfy your palate. Established banks are located near the bustling downtown. Cotonou is the financial center for Benin. It's also where the West African Stock Exchange does its trading every day. This is the heart of commerce in Cotonou. This is called the Dontokpa Marketplace, and this is where merchants sell their wares to local and national customers, and also where national companies from Nigeria, Niger, and Togo come here to sell their merchandise. There's plenty of parking for mopeds and cars. This is a normal crowd for a Saturday afternoon. It was hard to get through once inside. Every bit of space is taken up by merchants of every kind. The second floor was covered with people selling colorful materials and the accessories that go with them. Benin is ready for international trade and commerce to begin again in earnest. They have the infrastructure in place. Cotonou also operates one of the largest ports in West Africa. Ron Taylor, General Superintendent of Lambert's Point Docks in Norfolk, traveled to Benin to participate in the conference and develop business ties with the Port of Cotonou for Norfolk Southern. He shared his experience with President Karakou.
What I've learned here the past few days was never taught in American history. In America, they don't teach what happened in Africa. And while I was here, I experienced a series of emotions. At some points I was angry, at other points I was saddened. I have complete release now.
President Karakou hopes that through his Reconciliation and Development Conference, the African diaspora will find release, and the century-old wounds will heal, and a new trust built on forgiveness will bring his country economic security, as well as building a bridge of reconciliation to the descendants of a lost people.
Signifie beaucoup de choses. Mais en réalité, ce qui nous préoccupe, ce n'est pas parce que mon pays est pauvre.
I owe you the truth, and the truth is made clear in the theme of this conference. The theme is reconciliation and development. The word development does not appear in the theme because I'm from a poor country. It does not appear in the theme because of what I've gone through in my life. It does not appear in the theme because we want money. I think what is very, very important for me at this conference is reconciliation. And if we, because I'm also the president of the poor in this country, and if we were to put development before reconciliation, I'm sure of one thing: God will not bless such a development. That is why the most important thing for me was this pardon, this forgiveness that we needed from you.
Developing relationships will take time, and the Benin people stand ready for the challenge. They've already tackled a difficult but noble desire for reconciliation. Now, they're ready for the healing to begin.
For more information on this program, log on to WHRO's website, www.whro.org.